Your heart is beating at exactly 7 cycles per second right now, the exact same frequency as Earth's magnetic field. That's not a coincidence. That's proof that you and the universe are the same oscillating system. An Israeli engineer proved this with electrodes and magnetometers before dying while carrying the manuscripts. Bentov discovered that in the exact moment between each heartbeat, the cosmic pendulum stops before reversing. In that infinitesimal instant, every possible version of your reality coexists simultaneously. That's where Neville Goddard was navigating when he taught about the I am, not some philosophical concept, but the source code of existence where you select which frequency to tune into consciously. Meditators in Bentov's lab weren't just imagining light checks. Photomultipliers detected actual photons being emitted. When they entered altered states of consciousness, magnetometers recorded measurable electromagnetic fields. Nearby random number generators deviated from expected probabilities, bending the laws of chance itself. Corporations know this. That's why algorithms exploit the 3.5 seconds your brain takes to release dopamine. They keep you trapped in the stimulation cycle before you can access the reversal point where choice exists. The question isn't whether you're being manipulated, it's whether you'll keep letting them choose your frequency. But the source code of existence, where you select which frequency to tune into consciously.
Recommendation algorithms know exactly how long you need to look at an image before they release dopamine. That is 3.5 seconds on average. They have mapped your patterns of attention, they have identified your emotional triggers, and they now orchestrate your digital experience to keep you oscillating between microdoses of pleasure and anxiety. However, this technological manipulation operates according to far older and deeper principles, the very ones that Itzhak Bentov uncovered in the 1970s through his experiments with consciousness and vibration. What makes Bentov's findings so unsettling for our digital age is that they reveal how algorithmic manipulation is only the industrial version of a fundamental mechanism. Every person lives inside a unique perceptual bubble that is determined by the specific configuration of his or her nervous system interacting with vibratory fields. The crucial difference is that Bentov demonstrated how we can take conscious control of this process, the very knowledge that technology corporations would prefer that you did not have. Bentov was an unlikely mystic. He was an Israeli biomedical engineer and the inventor of the steerable cardiac catheter, and he applied scientific rigor to phenomena that conventional science ignored. His experiments with meditators revealed something measurable. Altered states of consciousness produced real changes in the human electromagnetic field. Electrodes picked up variations, and magnetometers recorded shifts in the field around the body. During deep meditation, the hearts of skilled practitioners entered perfect coupling with the Earth's magnetic pulsations. The Schumann resonance, which oscillates at approximately 7.83 Hz, the same frequency range as brainwaves in deep meditative states. Decades earlier, Neville Goddard was already navigating these same territories experientially. For Goddard, I am was not an abstract philosophical concept, but the operational substrate of existence. When someone declares, "I am rich" or "I am healthy," the person is not making a superficial positive affirmation. He or she is navigating among already existing configurations of the fundamental I am, tuning different frequencies along the infinite spectrum of possibilities. The synthesis of these two approaches, the engineering of Bentov and the practice of Goddard, reveals the full map. Bentov provided the architecture. Our universe has a toroidal form, like a cosmic donut in which matter continually emerges, expands, and returns. At the center of this torus, he located the point of maximum potentiality, where all possible trajectories coexist before any single one manifests. In May 1979, Bentov was traveling to present these findings when American Airlines Flight 191 crashed in Chicago. The irony speaks volumes. His theories about consciousness as an eternal informational pattern, not limited to a biological substrate, have continued to reverberate through laboratories decades after his body ceased to oscillate. His paradoxical death raises the central question of this piece. If reality responds to the vibratory patterns that we hold, and if technology corporations have industrialized this knowledge in order to monetize attention, then who is determining the patterns that you are sustaining right now? The life trajectory of Itzhak Bentov explains his unique perspective. Born in Czechoslovakia in 1923, he survived the Holocaust. He fought in Israel's War of Independence, and he emigrated to the United States. This experience forged a mind capable of holding paradox, the rigor of an engineer who must make medical devices work inside the human body, combined with the visceral knowledge that consensual reality can collapse completely. He had witnessed that in Europe in the 1940s. This dual perspective led Bentov to conduct unusual experiments. While he was developing the first steerable cardiac catheter, he built, in his garage, a platform suspended by cables that isolated external vibrations. When experienced meditators sat on this platform, ultra-sensitive accelerometers detected a consistent phenomenon. The entire body began to oscillate at approximately 7 cycles per second. It was not involuntary muscle tremor, it was the cardiovascular system itself creating a standing wave that traveled along the spinal column. This discovery connected directly with the work of Neville Goddard, who had taught in Los Angeles and New York decades earlier that consciousness is the only reality. Goddard did not have instruments with which to measure, but he knew experientially what Bentov was now confirming. When we enter specific states of consciousness, our entire vibratory system reorganizes. Goddard called this assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled, not mental visualization, but the full somatic inhabiting of a different state. In Stalking the Wild Pendulum, Bentov explains the mechanism. The 7 cycles per second micro-oscillation of the body corresponds precisely to the fundamental frequency of the Earth's magnetic field. However, there was something even more significant. Experienced meditators could consciously modulate this oscillation, and when they did so, magnetometers detected alterations in the magnetic field around their bodies. The conclusion was revolutionary. Consciousness and electromagnetism are measurable aspects of the same fundamental phenomenon. In parallel, Bentov's cosmological model provided the broader context. In a brief tour of higher consciousness, he describes the universe as a hierarchical toroidal structure. At the densest physical level, objects appear separate. At what he calls the astral level, consciousnesses begin to interpenetrate, explaining why emotions are literally contagious through field resonance. In the higher levels, the overlap increases progressively until it reaches what both Bentov and Goddard identified as the fundamental I am, pure consciousness before it assumes any specific form. Bentov found that the center of the universal torus contains what he called the primordial seed, a point of infinite density containing all information in potential. As DNA in a single cell contains the blueprint for the entire organism, this seed contains all the possibilities of the universe. Matter emerges from this point through a white hole, circulates along the toroidal surface, and returns through a black hole, creating the continuous cycle of manifestation and dissolution that we experience as reality. The holographic structure that Bentov identified explains how Goddard could navigate among states. In a hologram, every fragment contains information about the whole. As galaxies move along the toroidal surface, they radiate informational waves that interlace to form a hologram that fills the entire inner space. each individual consciousness is simultaneously a single point of perspective and an aperture through which the entire universe experiences itself. Goddard intuited this when he wrote, "I am is that reality to which, whatever happens, we must turn for the explanation of the phenomena of life. The I am remains constant while we assume different states. It is the unchanging observer navigating through the configurations, rich, poor, healthy, sick, without being fundamentally altered by any of them. The convergence is clear. You are not in the universe observing from the outside. You are a specific modulation of the universal field that is experiencing a particular perspective." Bentov demonstrated mathematically how alterations in your personal electromagnetic field propagate through the universal hologram. Goddard provided the practical method. Assume the feeling of the desired state with such completeness that it naturally crystallizes into experience. Both agreed on the fundamental principle: reality is not discovered, it is consciously selected. Bentov's pendular model transcends poetic metaphor and reveals the precise mathematics of how reality operates. An electron does not orbit the nucleus in a continuous circular motion. It oscillates between extreme points, and it exists as a probability wave until it is observed. Planets trace pendular ellipses around stars, and the universe itself, according to current cosmological calculations, will expand to a maximum point before it potentially reverses, the definitive cosmic pendulum. The crucial moment of this oscillation is the point of reversal. Bentov showed that in that infinitesimal instant, lasting less than Planck time, 10 to the minus 43 seconds, the smallest unit of time with physical meaning, the normal laws of causality become suspended. The object exists in quantum superposition, occupying multiple positions simultaneously. Only when the movement begins again does a specific trajectory collapse into observable reality. Now consider the implications. Your body contains trillions of these reversal points happening continuously. Every molecule of ATP in your cells oscillates 10,000 times per second between energetic states. Calcium ions pulse through neural membranes in rhythmic cascades. Your heart creates pressure waves that make every blood vessel expand and contract, generating what Bentov called a behavioral wave throughout the entire circulatory system. This is where Goddard's work becomes especially relevant. He knew these reversal moments experientially and called them the end of the day, that hypnagogic state before sleep when the rational mind relaxes, while consciousness remains present. Assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled, he instructed, and notice the track that your attention follows. In this liminal state, you can think from the desired state rather than thinking about it. The critical difference between observing a possibility from the outside and inhabiting it from the inside. Bentov's toroidal universe provides the mechanical map of how this navigation works. Pure consciousness, what he calls the absolute, flows through progressively modulating layers. First, there appear primordial, geometric forms that Bentov identified as similar to Sanskrit letters, creating what ancient traditions called the primordial sound of creation. These forms are not symbolic, they function as directional valves that modulate undifferentiated consciousness into specific patterns that we eventually experience as physical matter. The crucial neurological discovery came when Bentov mapped how we access these different levels. During deep meditative states, brainwaves progressively slow. Beta, active thinking, transitions to alpha, relaxation, then to theta, the creative state, approaching delta, deep sleep. In the theta zone, the exact zone on which Goddard focused his practice, something extraordinary occurs. The brain stops distinguishing between external sensory signals and internally generated images. To the nervous system, vivid imagining becomes literally indistinguishable from direct perception. It is not as if it were real. It is processed through the same neural circuits that process real experience. However, Bentov discovered a specific requirement that validates Goddard's insistence on feeling, systemic coherence. It is not enough to visualize mentally while the body remains in a state of stress or misalignment. The entire nervous system must come into phase, heart, respiration, and brain waves synchronizing into a single harmonic frequency. Goddard called this naturalness, the moment when the imagined scene stops feeling like mental effort and gains the spontaneous sensory quality of a genuine memory. Bentov's experiments with meditators in a coherent state produced results that challenged the conventional materialist paradigm. Photomultipliers detected real photon emissions when meditators visualized light. Magnetometers recorded measurable fields when they imagined magnetism. Even more unsettling, nearby random number generators deviated statistically from expected randomness, which suggested that coherent imagination was influencing quantum probabilities in the environment. The mechanism operates through what Bentov termed morphological resonance. When you hold a specific mental and emotional pattern with sufficient coherence, you create an attractor in the field of possibilities. The closest analogy is tuning a radio station. You are not creating the broadcast. You are adjusting your receiver in order to pick up a frequency that already exists on the spectrum. Goddard grasped this intuitively when he insisted that we do not create reality. We navigate among already existing states of the I am. This elegantly resolves the paradox of how individual consciousness can affect seemingly objective reality. In holographic systems, any local alteration instantly affects the entire pattern, not through signal transmission that is limited by the speed of light, but through quantum, non-local correlation. You, being a conscious holographic fragment, can influence the entire field through resonance. You do this not through force or through egoic will, but through what Goddard called surrender to the state, allowing the feeling of the wish fulfilled to reorganize your vibrational signature completely until you literally become the frequency that corresponds to that reality. The perpetual oscillation that Bentov identified is pulsing through your body at this very moment on multiple simultaneous scales. Your heart does not simply pump blood mechanically. It generates a complex pressure wave that travels through every artery at specific speeds that are determined by vascular elasticity. This wave resonates through the cerebrospinal fluid, creating subtle but measurable pulsations of the brain within the skull. Bentov was able to detect these micro-oscillations with accelerometers sensitive enough to measure displacements on the order of 1/10 of the diameter of an atom. These pressure waves create what he called standing waves in the fluid that bathes your neurons. Far from being an irrelevant side effect, this hydraulic system forms a parallel communication network that coordinates activity between brain regions that do not have direct neural connections. When you experience sudden fear, for example, your heart accelerates instantly, not only through nerve signals that would take fractions of a second, but also through immediate hydraulic coupling. The change in heart rhythm instantly alters the wave pattern in the brain's fluid, and that modification changes which neural networks are active. This is where Goddard's insistence that feeling is the secret gains neuroscientific validation. Genuine gratitude, not the mental concept, but the visceral somatic experience, creates a specific and measurable pattern of variability in heart rhythm. That cardiac pattern induces corresponding brain waves through the hydraulic coupling that Bentov mapped. Those brain waves selectively activate neural networks that are associated with memories of abundance and satisfaction. It is physiologically impossible to maintain a deep feeling of gratitude and simultaneously access mental states of scarcity. They are mutually exclusive configurations of the same oscillatory system. The human body replicates cosmic structures with a mathematical precision that transcends coincidence. The ratio between the cell nucleus and the cytoplasm mirrors the ratio between the Sun and planetary orbits. Patterns of neuronal branching are fractally identical to the distribution of galaxies in the observable universe. However, it was in DNA that Bentov found the deepest and the most practical correspondence. Every cell contains approximately 2 meters of DNA that are compacted into superhelices within a space smaller than the tip of a needle. If all of the DNA in your body were uncoiled and connected, it would reach beyond Pluto. This impossible filament does not serve only as a passive genetic archive. Bentov found that DNA operates as a biological antenna, receiving and transmitting electromagnetic signals that determine which genes are expressed from moment to moment. When your emotional state changes, DNA methylation patterns shift within minutes, activating some genes while silencing others. Goddard asserted that imagination reorganizes physical substance. Bentov demonstrated the exact mechanism. Consciousness modulates gene expression through electromagnetic fields. You are literally rebuilding yourself at the molecular level based on the state of consciousness that you hold consistently. The hierarchy of consciousness that Bentov mapped during his explorations reveals why Goddard's technique works. Bentov identified multiple layers, each one encompassing the previous one like nested Russian dolls of awareness. First, there is the rudimentary bodily consciousness that maintains vital functions during sleep or anesthesia. Above that, there is the emotional and mental consciousness that we identify as the everyday me. Beyond that, there are the expanded aspects of the I am, perspectives that observe multiple experiences simultaneously. The hypnagogic state that Goddard emphasized corresponds to the moment when we can consciously navigate among these levels. The usual me temporarily relaxes its control, which allows access to layers that are normally unconscious. That is why creative insights frequently arise in these liminal moments. You are temporarily accessing perspectives beyond the usual boundaries of the ego. Bentov's experiments revealed specific physiological changes during these transitional states. Pupils dilate even in well-lit environments, which indicates deep parasympathetic activation. Skin conductance increases dramatically, which shows energetic openness. More significantly, the electromagnetic field of the heart becomes exceptionally coherent and orderly, propagating to distances that are greater than usual, out to 2 to 3 meters from the body. Experienced practitioners of Goddard's technique demonstrated something that defies conventional explanations. When they held the feeling of the wish fulfilled during coherent states with sufficient intensity and naturalness, elaborate sequences of synchronicities began to appear. These were not forced interpretations of random events, but cascades of statistically improbable coincidences that led directly to the manifestation of the imagined state. Bentov theorized the mechanism. During deep coherence, consciousness operates beyond the limits of the physical body through morphogenetic resonance. Just as one tuning fork can make another identical tuning fork vibrate at a distance, your coherent electromagnetic signature can influence similar fields in the environment, organizing events through non-local correlation. A case documented by Bentov illustrates the phenomenon. An engineer practicing the technique vividly imagined receiving a specific job offer. He maintained the state with such naturalness that he began preparing as if he already had the job. 2 weeks later, a company that had not been hiring created a position that exactly matched his visualization after a key employee left unexpectedly. The chain of events was so unlikely that Bentov calculated the odds as astronomical, yet the result was consistent with the influence of a coherent field on chaotic systems that are sensitive to initial conditions. Modern neuroscience, although it does not always credit Bentov, confirms his findings. Neuroimaging techniques show that vivid imagination activates the same brain regions as real experience. Athletes who practice mentally display performance gains that are similar to those of physical training, and patients who visualize recovery show reduced inflammatory markers and accelerated healing. However, the most revolutionary aspect remains largely unacknowledged. Bentov's discovery that cardiac coherence can be consciously cultivated, and that this state influences not only our biology, but also the probability field around us. Every moment of deep coherence is literally reorganizing the matrix of possibilities, collapsing potentials into specific experiences through a mechanism that quantum physics is only beginning to formalize. What emerges is the vision of reality as a deeply participatory process. You do not observe a pre-existing universe. You continuously select which version you experience through the vibratory patterns that you hold. Bentov provided the equations, and Goddard provided the practice. Together, they revealed that conscious navigation among states is not magical thinking. It is applied engineering of consciousness that operates on levels that we are only now learning to measure. Bentov's discoveries anticipated scientific developments that later gained mainstream research attention. The electromagnetic field of the heart, now routinely measured in research laboratories, extends detectably 2 to 3 meters beyond the body and carries emotional information that other nervous systems decode preconsciously. When two people interact, their cardiac fields literally intertwine, creating a shared interference pattern that influences both people before consciousness processes any verbal communication. These observations offer intriguing perspectives on interpersonal dynamics. What we colloquially call chemistry between people may involve components of physiological synchronization, including heart rate variability and other biological markers. Phenomena such as interpersonal attraction operate through multiple channels: visual, olfactory, behavioral, and possibly bioelectric, that are integrated in ways that science is still striving to map completely. Many therapists report perceiving the emotional states of clients before any verbal communication, a phenomenon that may involve both the reading of micro-expressions and possible sensitivity to subtle changes in a shared bioelectric environment. Integrative medicine has progressively explored practical applications of these concepts. The HeartMath Institute, founded in 1991, developed cardiac coherence protocols that have been adopted by thousands of health professionals. Although there are thematically interesting parallels with Bentov's pioneering work on cardiac physiology and meditative states, HeartMath developed its methodology through independent research. Published studies document that patients who are trained in coherence techniques show measurable improvements: more efficient post-operative recovery, reductions in the use of pain medication, and decreases in hospital readmission rates. The proposed mechanisms include modulation of the autonomic nervous system, reduction of oxidative stress, and optimization of heart rate variability, processes that can facilitate the organism's natural recovery. Brain-computer interfaces have inadvertently validated Goddard's claim that imagination precedes physical manifestation. The most effective algorithms do not attempt to decode mental commands, but detect intentional states. The user feels himself or herself performing the desired action. Neuralink and similar companies have discovered that vivid imagining with an emotional component produces clearer neural signals than abstract thinking about actions, However, it is in the field of collective consciousness that the implications become truly paradigmatic. Princeton's Global Consciousness Project, which monitors random number generators around the world, has detected statistically significant deviations during events of collective emotional focus. The data from September 11, 2001, show changes that begin hours before the attacks, which suggests that collective consciousness may detect, or even influence, future events through non-local mechanisms that Bentov anticipated. The institutional resistance to these findings reveals more about economics than about science. If emotional states can modulate gene expression more effectively than many pharmaceuticals, if cardiac coherence influences recovery as much as expensive medical interventions, and if focused imagination affects the probabilities of clinical outcomes, then billions of dollars in symptomatic treatments become obsolete. Entire industries depend on the premise that we are broken biological machines that require external repair, not conscious systems that are capable of self-organization. Contemplative traditions have always known these principles experientially, but we now have the instrumentation to validate them. Tibetan monks demonstrate the ability to raise local body temperature by up to 17 degrees through Tummo meditation. Indian yogis reduce oxygen consumption to 2% of normal, entering verifiable states of suspended animation. Amazonian shamans consistently navigate states of consciousness that correspond precisely to the brainwave frequencies that Bentov associated with different levels of reality. The emerging paradigm completely recontextualizes mental health. Depression correlates with specific patterns of cardiac incoherence, not only metaphorically, but in heart rate variability data. Anxiety manifests as desynchronization between the respiratory and the cardiovascular systems. Trauma creates literal fragmentation in coherence patterns, with different bodily systems vibrating at conflicting frequencies. Treatments that are based on the restoration of coherence show effectiveness that is comparable to or superior to pharmacological interventions without side effects. Specific rhythmic breathing, 4-7-8, box breathing, and cardiac coherence reestablishes systemic synchronization. Binaural beats induce specific brain states through entrainment, and bilateral movement integrates cerebral hemispheres, which helps explain the effectiveness of EMDR for trauma. Education is beginning to integrate these insights. Schools that implement coherence moments before tests report increases of 15 to 20% in performance. More significantly, children demonstrate improvements in creativity, collaborative problem solving, and emotional intelligence. They intuitively understand what Bentov demonstrated. Internal state determines not only what we perceive, but also what we are able to conceive and to create. However, it is in the realm of social change that the implications become deepest. If emotional fields are literally contagious through resonance, then social movements, cultural shifts, and revolutions can be understood as moments when individual fields synchronize at a frequency that makes the old configurations unsustainable. The Arab Spring, Occupy Wall Street, and the Me Too movement displayed patterns of rapid and decentralized propagation that some theorists compare to the dynamics of complex systems, although that analogy remains an interpretive framework, not a literal description of causal mechanisms. Technology corporations understand these principles better than most scientists do. Engagement algorithms are designed specifically to keep users oscillating between emotional states that maximize screen time. Notifications are timed in order to interrupt moments of potential coherence. Feeds are curated to maintain just enough baseline anxiety to drive consumption, but not so much that it leads to abandoning the platform. This is the dark industrialization of the knowledge that Bentov and Goddard offered as a tool of liberation. The crucial difference is that they taught how to become conscious and to take control of the process. Every moment offers the choice to tune a different frequency, to access a different possibility, and to collapse a different potential into experience. The final paradox that Bentov identified is this: we are simultaneously the individual wave and the entire ocean. Each perspective is true, and none is complete. The oscillation between these perspectives, me and universe, finite and infinite, particle and wave, is the fundamental breath through which reality continually creates itself. Let us return to the opening point. Recommendation algorithms that know exactly how long you need to look at an image before they release dopamine. 3.5 seconds, long enough for your heart field to respond, for your brain waves to begin to synchronize, and for your biochemistry to initiate a reward cascade. Technology corporations have reverse engineered the principles that Bentov mapped, and they have turned the sacred mechanism of reality creation into a machine for extracting attention. However, you now understand something that fundamentally changes the equation. You are not a passive victim of these systems. You are a conscious oscillator that is capable of choosing your own frequency. Bentov demonstrated that we can consciously modulate our resonance. Goddard practiced this, and he taught ordinary people to navigate among states through conscious appropriation, not vague hope, but full inhabiting of the chosen state with a naturalness that reorganizes your entire electromagnetic signature. The irony of Bentov's death, while he was carrying manuscripts about the transcendence of consciousness as his plane went down, becomes less paradoxical when we understand his discoveries. Consciousness as an informational pattern is not limited to a biological substrate. The equations that he left continue to be verified. His oscillations ceased, but the waves that he set in motion continue to propagate through the collective morphogenetic field. Consider this present moment with a new awareness. Your vagus nerve is transmitting bidirectional signals between your gut and your brain, and it is influencing your emotional state before consciousness intervenes. Your heart field extends meters beyond your body, touching and being touched by other fields. Every cell emits biophotons in patterns that both reflect and create your global state. You are a symphony of oscillations that Bentov could measure, that Goddard could navigate, and that corporations now monetize. The state that both of them identified as the portal, that quality of naturalness in which visualization transcends effort, corresponds precisely to what modern laboratories identify as optimal cardiac coherence. 0.1 hertz of heart rate variability, 6 breaths per minute, and brainwaves in alpha and theta. In that state, you are not trying to manifest. You are tuning a specific station on the infinite spectrum of possibilities that the I Am contains. The tools exist not as digital products that promise more stimulation and more optimization, but as ancient practices that are validated by modern science. 4, 7/8 breathing that synchronizes cardiac and respiratory rhythms, binaural tones that induce specific brain states through entrainment, and meditation that establishes global coherence. Each technique operates through the same fundamental principle. Establish internal coherence that resonates with the frequency of the chosen reality. Goddard left us the essential instruction: assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled and notice the track that your attention follows. Bentov showed us the map of that track. Through measurable cardiac coherence, through synchronized brainwaves, and through electromagnetic fields that propagate beyond the body and influence quantum probabilities in the universal holographic field. The synthesis of these visions offers something revolutionary: a scientific understanding of how consciousness participates actively in the construction of reality, combined with practical methods for applying that knowledge. It is not magical thinking, It is quantum mechanics applied at levels that we are only now beginning to measure adequately. The question that began this exploration now has a clear answer. Ultimately, you determine the vibratory patterns that you sustain. However, this requires awareness and practice. Without awareness, you remain an instrument that is played by external forces, algorithms, media, and other people's emotional fields. With awareness and with technique, you become the conductor of your own oscillatory symphony. The toroidal universe continues its eternal cycle of expansion and return. You are simultaneously the observer and the participant in this process. Every breath is an opportunity to tune a different frequency. Every moment of coherence is literally reorganizing the field of possibilities around you. The choice has always been and will always be yours. To remain an object that oscillates unconsciously according to external forces, or to become a conscious subject who deliberately navigates the infinite states of the I Am, every change begins with the understanding of your role as a co-creator, and the conscious coupling with the fundamental rhythms that Bentov mapped is your direct interface with the source code of reality. We have developed a set of audio tools to help you access this state of deep resonance. To learn more and to get immediate access, click the link on the screen or in the comments. If this video resonated with you, write in the comments. I assume the feeling of my chosen reality.